One of my favorite pastimes is astrology. I have some great equipment for looking up at the skies and stars at night, but what you're really in need of sometimes is just overall darkness. You see, artificial light from street lamps and cars and whatnot can really impair your night vision, and to be able to see the amazing celestial bodies. So, when there was a chance of a rare constellation coming into view, I packed up my telescope and other equipment and headed off into the woods, where I wouldn't be bothered by headlamps, cars, streetlights. Ultimately, zero distractions. I was all set up and ready right around midnight, with the supposed best time to catch the sighting right around 12:30. I even had coffee to keep me awake, but I was more than excited with the adrenaline and being all cozy, wrapped up and nice and warm. Thankfully, it was early October time, so although cool, it wasn't too freezing just yet. And just after midnight, I heard some shuffling in the leaves close by. This wasn't exactly a great surprise, and there were very likely all sorts of nocturnal creatures wondering what on earth this intruder was doing in their home. I was the trespasser to them, so long as whatever nosy animal didn't come and disturb me whilst I was trying to record a very rare sighting. I didn't really care. I knew nightlife was active, but I didn't want to be bothered. To be honest, I was so mesmerized by staring up at the stars, due to the amazing clarity without any light pollution. It took me a few minutes to realize the curious animal had indeed decided to come a little closer, and it was making a noise that I wasn't too happy. Rather than a cute chittering from a squirrel or maybe some sort of possum or raccoon, I can now clearly hear a heavy, raspy breathing. It also seemed to be far too close to me for comfort. Tearing my eyes away from the telescope for just a few seconds, I stood up, shone my light around, and I had almost done a full sweep when I caught sight of the heavy breather. I very nearly dropped my flashlight in shock, for there stood something which not only should not have been in the woods, but all rights should not even exist. I'm a man of science, and I gaze up at the night sky from an astronomy point of view, not astrology. I do not believe in things that go bump in the night, and yet, standing before me, what I can only describe as a man-sized and shaped dog. It was likely around 6 feet, had a little body, but all the lean and toned muscles of an athlete, except covered in black fur. It was clearly bipedal, yet the lower limbs were similar to its canine hind leg counterparts, and they were also bowed in the knee. The arms were more like a human, and the head reminded me somewhat of a cross between a Doberman Pinscher and a hyena, except far uglier. Despite the slender-looking torso, the head was also overly large. It had very small eyes, and a very disturbing look on its face, like it was intent on getting me. I'm not young, and it would have been pointless to try and put up any resistance if it were to attack me. From the look of this thing, and judging by its strength and ultimate stealth abilities, I would have been a goner if it really wanted to. And yet it didn't appear aggressive, more like, why are you here? However, its presence was more than enough for me to hastily pack up and hurry back home. I didn't get to see the rare constellation, but I wasn't too sure how long I was welcome. I've never told a living soul about this, because I don't think anybody would ever believe me. After all, I even feel silly typing it out. It would probably also likely destroy any reputation as a man of science that I have. After this encounter, it's opened my mind up to other possibilities of existence too. Hopefully, for me, that's a good thing. A few weeks ago, I was driving back from a friend's house when I saw something scurry across the road in front of me. I slammed on my brakes due to not wanting to hit it, and it was only late afternoon, but it had been raining, so my lights were on. The roads were wet too, so I was trying to be extra mindful. I've seen all sorts of things make a mad dash, like deer and bucks, nearly totaling my car in the process. I guess the woods were here long before the road, and the animals that live in these parts don't exactly know the Green Cross code. But now, stopped in the road, lights and wipers on full, I saw the strangest looking animal that has ever run out from the trees. I would have said it was as tall as a man, with a body like a man too, but like a Stone Age man, covered in thick woolly hair and slightly hunched over. It stood on two long legs, but looked like its spine might be curved, and had really long, outstretched arms that kind of dangled. Apart from the fact that it obviously appeared naked, just skin and very thick, thin, woolly hair, from the neck down, maybe it could have been some sort of person. Except the head was not human at all. It looked like that of a dog, kind of like a German Shepherd dog, except its face was more narrow, if that makes sense. Like a German Shepherd, the face is more broad and wide, with wide ears, but this snout was much smaller, much longer, and much more narrow, and its upper eye bone muscles were much more pronounced, if that makes sense. The head was all furry too, and the ears were also much taller and much more pointed. The eyes were also much more set back in its skull than a German Shepherd. I wasn't really sure what to do, and on impulse, I put my hand on the horn, just like I would have had it been a deer or another animal. It made a weird grunting, distorted sound, and disappeared running off through the trees on the opposite side of the road. The woods over there were thicker and go on for miles and miles, and are supposedly meant to be the rumors that it is haunted. Well, I'm pretty sure there ain't no ghost in there, but there's definitely this animal, that's for sure. Whenever I get bad news of any kind, I take off. Always have done, and probably always will. It's just my way of coping. Sometimes I might just head out of the house and walk until my head clears. Other times I have jumped in the car and ended up in another state even, which I guess isn't saying much, since I'm only an hour away from my state's border. I'd already had a couple of beers, so the car option was out of the question, when I got a phone call alerting me to the fact that my aunt, whom I was very close with, had died. I just grabbed my keys and walked out of the house. I didn't know where I was headed, just that I had to walk and walk until the news sank in. It was already late afternoon, as I'd been enjoying the game with a couple of beers, so by the time I had reached the woods at the far end of town, it was beginning to get dark. I hadn't been around there in years, but I remembered as a kid and a teenager, there used to be rumors about a dog walker finding mutilated bunnies and hearing high-pitched sounds coming from the depths of the woods. A story and tale I called total BS on, and sounded to me like something our parents would have made up to keep us from getting out of trouble. The last thing on my mind right then was whether there might be bunny bodies littered about, or some wild, ravenous beast who gets his rocks off by screaming at passerbyers. To be honest, I barely even registered how far I was into the woods when it suddenly dawned on me that I can only just see where I was going. That seemed to be the point at which I knew that I had walked far enough away from home, and now needed to turn back for the long return trek. Usually when I clear my head, I end up somewhere that I still recognize. It's like my body goes onto autopilot and just walks, but at the same time my mind keeps me on a track that I know. Not this time. This time, I ended up in the deep woods, and I hadn't been there for about 20 years. Every path still looked the same. Still, this was not the time to panic. I literally did a 180 and hoped that it was the direction that I had entered the woods by. And of course, right at that moment, I stepped on something that I can only describe as gooey. It felt sticky and wet. When I shone my light from my cell phone down on the ground, I could see that it was dark and thick, and there were little bits of what looked to be bone and fur. It was a dead animal, or what was left. I felt sick to my stomach, and tried wiping the gore off my shoe. A little voice popped into my head right then. If the stories about the dead rabbits and animals were true, I began panicking. Complete and total panic. I started to run, which, if you have ever seen a horror movie, or indeed been in the woods in the dark, you will know this is never a good idea. Because even if the monster doesn't get you, the low branches and brambles sticking out of the ground will. Or you'll run straight into something solid. If you are lucky, that will be a sturdy tree, and you can pick yourself up. But in my case, this solid mass was hot, furry, and audibly making a groaning noise. As I lay there on the floor, I quickly pulled out my cell phone to see exactly what was there. And this thing was huge, taller and broader than me, covered in hair, a strong body and arms and legs like a man, except for the hair, of course. And then the head was something else altogether, because the head reminded me very much of a wolf. Pointy ears and very intelligent, fierce yellow eyes. It had its mouth open, with a terrible grin on its face, like it couldn't have been more excited to get to me, because now it had an expression like it wanted to tear me limb from limb, and a sort of malice. That's when I picked myself up, and surprisingly, it let me continue running out of the woods, and never try to get back to me, or run after me. I guess the only reason people see dead animals in there is because this thing doesn't eat people, maybe. Scary as it was to actually see this thing, I feel better knowing that it let me go and didn't kill me. But I can't help wonder why. Why didn't it kill me, even though I was right there in its grasp, and it seemed to be enjoying the fact that I was there in front of it, and that I saw it? I'll never know.